Hello, everyone. It is your favorite youth pastor, Luke, here, and we're back for our second series since we've entered this interesting lockdown season. And our next series is going to focus on the question, what is virtue? So we're going to have a bunch of videos, and my hope for you guys is that this is something that you can take with you, and the lessons that we learn about virtue and specifically the Christian perspective on virtue are lessons that you can take with you into your daily lives. You might not think that this question has anything to do with school or with how you are at home or how you are with your friends, but it does, and I'm hoping that we can see that. And of course, the question of what is virtue is related to a bunch of other questions. Questions like, what is good for my life? And what does Christianity have to do with virtue and things like that? So, my hope for us is as we go through this lesson, we're going to introduce the topic, and then in our following lessons, we're going to be more specific on different particular virtues. But my hope for you guys is that you learn to see this with fresh eyes, orange zesty eyes. That you guys can see this question in a way that is exciting. And I hope that you get at least half as excited as I am because this is a fun topic. And with that, we'll go ahead and kick right in. The first point that I want us to linger on for talking about virtue is to realize that this is something that takes time. So, becoming a virtuous person, becoming a righteous person, is not something that you learn in a day. It's not like memorizing some facts or getting the right answer for something. It's something that we build over time. And the Bible has plenty of verses that talk about different parts of living well and being a virtuous person. And one of those verses is found in the book of First Peter. So in First Peter chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, he writes, "For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness." So I love lists like this in the Bible because it really unpacks not just details about a good life, but the pathway that we have to take to get there. And that's really helpful because sometimes it's hard to know how to go from A to B to C. And specifically, I have in bold here some of the aspects that Peter brings to our attention that are really relevant to this topic. So, you guys might think, or we might, I know when I was growing up, I sometimes thought this, that being a Christian is really just about faith. That, you just say, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, and that's it. That's what makes me a fulfilled Christian. Well, that might be a good starting point, but as you can see, Peter says here that we are striving every day to add to our faith goodness, and then he unpacks it further from there. And specifically, those three of knowledge, self control, and perseverance. I think there's one good word that brings all of these things together, and that word is habit. So when you form a good habit, Peter is saying that is involves several different pieces of that puzzle. He says you have to add knowledge to yourself. So to have a good habit, that requires true knowledge of the world. It's not enough just to have good intentions. You have to know yourself and you have to know the world around you. And he says self-control. So he says you got to be disciplined because there's no shortage of distractions out there. Now, one of my distractions or one of my bad habits that I'll be happy to admit is sleeping habits. Sometimes when I'm left to my own devices, I will sleep in and I waste the better part of the day. So discipline and self-control are important. And then he says perseverance. And perseverance means to stick to it. It means to keep repeating the same thing you know is good even when it's hard. And that means being consistent. And you know what? There's one more thing that I would add to this list, and that comes from the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 5, where it's written, "Let your reasonableness," this is a letter to a church. So he's saying, everyone in the church, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. And what a great piece of advice. So I think we can add to the list rationality. You should be a rational person. And it's really good to have the Bible saying this, especially in a day and age where so many people think that being a person of faith or believing in God or being a Christian is an irrational thing. And it's something that's just blind faith, and you don't have any reason about it, but you just do it because it feels good. And the Bible says the exact opposite. It says, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. So those guys are some of the ingredients or some of the pieces of a habit. And so virtue is something that we build over time, and it's a habit that gets ingrained in us. Just like bad habits can, virtue is a good habit. Now, there's another aspect of virtue that's very, very, very important, and that's one of balance. Now, the Bible talks about how righteous behavior, good behavior, is doesn't get caught up in excess. It's balanced between extremes. So again, from First Peter, Peter writes, "For we have spent." He's talking about himself and the other people in the church in their past lives before they took God seriously, before they came to have faith in Jesus. It says, "For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles." Gentile just means someone who that is not of faith, it doesn't believe in God. Living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. So that's quite the laundry list of really excessive and negative and harmful and bad activities. So Peter is really emphasizing this point here, kind of almost going overboard and saying there's all these sorts of things that we've all come out of, these bad habits, and that's stuff that we've abandoned. We've abandoned the kind of life that lives excessively, that is always looking for the most extreme pleasure, the most extreme experience, and not taking into account that there's a price to pay for that when you're living in such an extreme kind of way. So, to kind of get this idea of balance in our heads, I want us to consider a thought experiment. And for this thought experiment, we can focus on the virtue of bravery. I hope all of us know and believe that being brave or courageous is a virtuous thing. So, I want to pose for us the question: is a person brave who runs away from every single danger? So imagine that. Maybe you find that this could be your weakness, is that when something is challenging or there's a dangerous situation, your first instinct is just to turn and run the other way every single time. So if we're asking this question and we're trying to answer honestly, I believe we would all come to the conclusion that that's not a brave person. That is the kind of person we would call cowardly, who literally just runs away from every danger. So at this point, you might be thinking, aha, well, now, Luke, I know that the answer must be that the brave person is instead the person who does the exact opposite and the person who charges into every danger. But again, if we think of that question a little bit, then I think we also realize that that's not quite brave either, because there could be a dangerous situation that isn't worth risking. It isn't worth the risk if you're based on an actual knowledge of the scenario. Or it could be something that is the wrong cause to fight for. So if you just charge into every dangerous scenario, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, what your motivation is, then that kind of person we would call rash or foolhardy or foolish. You just are charging in and you're not actually thinking it through. Is it worth it? So the reality then is that between the person who is cowardly or between the impulse of being fearful and between this foolishness that just charges in no matter what, there is a balancing act, and sometimes that's a very difficult balancing act, and we don't always know how to calculate that. But in the middle somewhere is real courage, is picking your battles, not running away from everyone, but also not charging into everyone either. And that's what makes a person courageous and brave. So, as we've seen now, that there's an element of balance too that comes with virtue. It's a habit. You have to be balanced in your behavior. There's also this idea in the Bible about excellence, about a virtuous life is not just one that is checking off the boxes, that is doing the bare minimum or following some kind of list. and try and just to skate by. I'm sure we've all been there where we have a school assignment where it's maybe coming down to the wire and we procrastinated. And so we just do the bare minimum and we turn it in and we maybe get a passing grade, but we're not proud of it. We know it's not really very good. Well, in the Bible, in the book of Philippians again, it's written the following. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, another list, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So, guys, the Bible here is reminding us that it's not just about doing the bare minimum. That when you have a life that trusts in God and believes in God and accepts God into your heart, where you can have a living relationship with God and forgiveness and to know what love is, that is something that is not just going to settle for what is maybe okay or even what's good. That is going to inspire you to always go from good to better to best. And Philippians puts it that way, to say that think on the things not just that are good, but that are excellent, the things that are praiseworthy. So we're always, as Christians, guys, shooting for the prize. We're always, if we're running a race, we're shooting for first place in that race, always. And if we fall short, that's okay, because like we said before, it takes time. Virtue is not all built in a single day. And towards that point, it's also not a process that we just do by ourselves. We're always involved, especially as Christians, in a community. We're always having our friends and our family and people to support us. So if it sounds like a challenging task, we have to remind ourselves that we have support. We have the support of others around us who love us, and we also have the support of God every single step of the way. So, looking a bit forward to our following lessons that we're going to focus on specific virtues. And the Christian tradition is really rich on this, and there's been a lot of people who have come before us that have reflected on what the different virtues are, what the kind of good behaviors are. We touched on one earlier. We talked about bravery. Now, St. Ambrose writes, and he's lived a few generations after the apostles, he says, and we know that there are four cardinal virtues. He calls them cardinal virtues: temperance, justice, prudence, and fortitude. And these guys, the cardinal virtues, are virtues that overlap between the Christian and even someone who isn't of faith. So these are virtues that someone who believes in God, but also someone who doesn't and is just trying to live a good life, could all agree on. And we're going to touch on these in the coming weeks. But the Christian also emphasizes additional virtues that come specifically from his or her faith. So that's why Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, so faith, hope, love remain. These three, but the greatest of these is love. So the uniquely Christian virtues, or the virtues that come from faith, are faith, hope, and love. And then Paul says the greatest of these is love. And he says the greatest is love because the Bible says that God himself is love. So love is at the absolute top of that list. So to kind of summarize, guys, as we wrap up and give a little bit of a definition of all the different things that we've looked at, of what the Bible has to say about virtue, we can say basically four things. Keep these things in mind as when you're thinking of what it means to live a good life, a rich life, a virtuous life. Virtue is a habit of the soul. So it takes time. It's built with perseverance and knowledge and consistency. And number two, it's in accordance with reason. So a habit of the soul that is rational. It's in accordance with reason, balanced between extremes, like we said, avoiding those excessive behaviors, and aimed at excellence. That's the quality of all virtues. And in the following weeks, we're going to touch on these virtues specifically, the individual ones, in our following lessons. So, with that being said, guys, I want to line up what we have next week coming for us. We're going to talk about the first and foremost of the cardinal virtues, the virtue of prudence. Now, prudence is a word that we don't typically think of as a high ranking virtue, and all the better reason for us to think on it. Because in years past, virtue or prudence was seen as one of the top virtues. So let's look forward to that, guys. I hope to catch you again on the next one. A reminder to catch us for our daily youth group updates at Instagram at rev.studentministries. We love you guys so much. We're praying for you always. Have a great day, and we will catch you again on the next one.